Welcome to the Strategy Sync YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries. So, I want you to imagine something. We all know the classic myth, right? A lone genius is just sitting in this, dimly lit garage.
Right, there's always a half-eaten pizza on a workbench somewhere in this story.
Exactly. There's the pizza, maybe some empty energy drinks, and suddenly they have this massive eureka moment. They just furiously write some code, build an app over the weekend, and boom.
Yeah, within a year, they're the newest tech billionaire on the cover of some glossy magazine.
Right. But the data actually shows that chasing that exact narrative is the #1 reason startups just totally crash and burn.
It really is. It's a complete fallacy.
Yeah, and today we are looking at the ultimate antidote to that genius idea myth. We are doing a deep dive into a really fascinating book called Starting Startups by Douglas Y. Park.
And Park's whole premise just dismantles that garage genius legend, piece by piece. What he offers instead is this heavily researched, incredibly practical diagnostic tool,
Which he calls the 3Ps framework.
Right. Yes, exactly. People, product, and position. And our mission for this deep dive is to basically unpack this framework completely for you.
So you walk away with some real aha moments instead of feeling overwhelmed. We're going to look at the actual underlying mechanics of why some ventures conquer the world, while others, even ones with arguably better initial ideas, just completely collapse.
And, even if you aren't planning on founding a company tomorrow, this framework applies so heavily to how you navigate your own career.
Oh, absolutely.
Like how you manage a department or even just how you pitch a new initiative to your boss. It's universally applicable.
So to really understand the 3Ps, I think we need to look at the environment where Douglas Y. Park actually formulated them. We have to rewind a bit to 1992.
Yeah, 1992. Park is just arriving at Stanford University, and the book sets a starkly different scene from the tech hub we all know today.
Right. I mean, Silicon Valley still had open farmland back then.
It did. And the internet as a commercial force was, it was barely in its infancy. And the interesting thing is, Park wasn't even a computer scientist.
No, he was a PhD candidate in sociology, wasn't he?
Exactly. And that sociology background is the critical lens for everything that follows in the book. Because sociologists study systems, right? They study group dynamics and how human behavior scales.
Right.
So Park gets pulled into this consulting role for a super early stage startup called Smart Patents. And the founders had this highly ambitious concept.
They wanted to build software that allowed companies to manage their patents strategically, right?
Yeah. But their immediate hurdle was their target demographic. In 1992, corporate lawyers were notoriously skeptical of adopting new tech. I mean, the legal industry was built on the billable hour and literal mountains of paper documents.
Not exactly a crowd begging for digital disruption.
Not at all. So the founders bring Park in, and by his own admission in the book, he knows absolutely nothing about startup.
Or enterprise pricing models or patent law, right? He's starting from zero.
Literally zero.
Right.
And they ask him, how should we price this software? What features should we emphasize to this totally reluctant market?
So what does he do? Because he can't rely on past experience.
Well, instead of relying on some grand theoretical vision or just guessing based on what other software companies were doing, he approaches it like a sociologist. He just digs deeply into the beta testing feedback.
Oh, interesting. So he just watches what they do.
Yeah, he spends his time listening to what the early skeptical users are actually doing with the software. He pays attention to the specific language they use to describe their frustrations.
Wow.
And based purely on that behavioral evidence, he crafts a pricing model, one that directly aligns the cost of the software with the strategic value the lawyers were extracting from it.
And it works, right?
It works perfectly. It becomes a huge driver in the company's eventual successful exit. But the profound shift for Park was the realization that Smart Patents didn't succeed just because the initial idea was clever.
Right. Ideas are everywhere.
Exactly. They succeeded because of the specific mechanisms they used to bring that idea into reality. The real differentiator was execution.
Execution. That is the prevailing theme of this entire book. And it's usually presented in contrast to what the book calls the failure epidemic.
Yeah, the failure epidemic. It's a great term for it.
There's this quote cited in the book from Noam Wasserman, who is a former Harvard Business School professor, and he says, "Ideas are cheap, execution is dear."
Which is so true. And the book also brings in research by Tom Eisenman on the actual postmortems of failed startups.
Right, and the data there is super revealing. It shows that companies rarely fail because the founders lack ambition or are somehow unintelligent.
No, they're usually incredibly smart people, But they fail because they scale their operations prematurely, before securing a real market, or they build products nobody wants because they just never tested their assumptions.
But I want to challenge this concept for a second.
Okay, go for it.
If we define execution simply as getting the right things done at the right time, isn't that a bit of a tautology? Like, obviously doing the right things makes you successful. How does Park actually define what the right things are when everything in a startup is just totally chaotic?
That is the central paradox of early-stage business. It totally feels like a tautology until you realize that most founders fundamentally misunderstand what execution even looks like.
How so? What do they think it is?
Well, the popular assumption is that execution means raw hustle, right? Working 100-hour weeks, sleeping under your desk, just constantly adding new features to your product to appease every single potential customer.
Yeah, the classic grind set mentality.
Exactly. But Park argues that execution is actually often subtractive. It is the discipline of saying no to 100 distractions so you can deliver on one core value proposition perfectly.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the book uses the early days of Instagram to illustrate this subtractive discipline, right?
Yes, the Instagram story is perfect here.
Right.
Because Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger, they didn't invent the concept of sharing photos.
Right. There were plenty of photo sites.
Yeah. And their initial prototype, which was this app called Bourbon, was actually incredibly cluttered. I mean, it had check-ins, it had gaming elements, and photo sharing all jumbled together.
So if they had relied on that standard definition of execution, just working harder, what would they have done?
They would have just hired more engineers. They would have tried to build out the gaming and the check-in features of Bourbon to make them better. They would have burned through all their capital trying to make this mediocre, complex app work.
But they didn't do that.
No. Their execution was entirely analytical. They looked at their user data and noticed, nobody is using these check-in features, but people are totally obsessed with the photo filters.
So they stripped it down.
Exactly. True execution was having the immense discipline to scrap months of hard work, strip away everything but the photos, and relaunch as Instagram.
Wow. That level of focus makes sense, but it kind of shifts our whole definition of strategy, because we often treat strategy as this high-level boardroom thinking, right?
Yeah.
Like the blueprint of a house. And execution is just the grunt work of hammering the nails. A blueprint won't keep the rain off your head. You actually have to pour the foundation and frame the walls.
That's a great analogy.
But Park states that execution is the strategy. So if execution is the strategy, and a founder is just staring at a massive flood of daily emergencies, how do they know what to execute first?
Well, you have to start with the entity that actually makes the decisions. I mean, going back to your analogy, you cannot build the house, regardless of how good the blueprint is, without a highly capable, aligned crew.
The crew, right.
Right. And this is the foundation of the 3Ps framework. The first P is people. And Park is completely unequivocal on this point. People are the driver of the entire system.
Meaning without them, nothing else matters.
Exactly. Without the right people functioning cohesively, you will never build the right product, and you will never, ever find a sustainable market position.
This feels a little counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Because we're fed this constant media diet of visionary founders pitching these world-changing products on massive stages.
Sure, the Steve Jobs narrative.
Yeah. But the data in the book suggests the people holding the checkbooks are actually looking past the product entirely to stare at the team.
They really are. There is this fascinating study cited in the book by Ilya Strebulev from Stanford and Alex Dang. They surveyed roughly 1,000 venture capitalists.
And just to put that into context for you, venture capitalists, or VCs, manage massive pools of money from institutional investors. Their whole business model relies on finding extremely early-stage companies that have the potential to grow exponentially.
Right. They're often aiming for a return of 10 or even 100 times their initial investment.
Because they know that out of 10 investments, 7 might fail completely, 2 might break even, and 1 has to pay for the entire fund.
Exactly. The stakes are just incredibly high, so their evaluation metrics are ruthlessly pragmatic. And when Strebulev and Dang asked these VCs what the single most important factor was in their investment decisions, 47% ranked the founding team as number 1.
47%.
Yeah. The team outranked the product, it outranked the size of the potential market, and it even outranked the business model itself.
That is wild. If almost half of VCs care more about the team than the actual product being built, what exactly are they seeing in the data that the rest of us are missing?
They are seeing the inevitability of change. Like I mentioned before, the product a founder pitches during a seed funding round is almost never the exact product that the eventual company takes public during an IPO.
Right. Markets shift constantly.
They shift, new competitors emerge out of nowhere, and initial assumptions are just frequently proven wrong, so VCs are making a calculated bet.
A bet on adaptability.
Exactly. They know that when the original idea hits a wall, a resilient, deeply aligned team will be able to analyze the failure, adapt, and figure out the necessary pivot. A highly capable team can fix a fundamentally flawed product.
But a dysfunctional team?
A dysfunctional team will destroy a brilliant product every single time.
Man, that makes a lot of sense. And the book digs into the anatomy of these resilient teams, right? It brings in some research by Ethan Mollick on this concept called founder embeddedness.
Yes. Mollick's data is super interesting. It shows that founding teams with a shared previous history, meaning, they had worked together in some capacity before launching this new venture, they experience a 25% higher post-funding survival rate.
A 25% bump. That is massive in an industry where failure is the default state.
It's huge. And the mechanism driving that survival rate is simply pre-established trust.
Right, because when things go wrong, you don't want to be figuring out how to talk to each other.
Exactly. When a startup's financial runway is shrinking, the product is full of bugs, and stress is at a maximum, a team that has been in the trenches together doesn't have to waste time figuring out how to communicate. They've already established a baseline for conflict resolution.
Conversely, the book highlights Tom Eisenman's concept of bad bedfellows and Noam Wasserman's extensive data on founder conflicts.
Yeah, the dark side of team dynamics.
What? Right. It turns out the biggest existential threat to a new business usually isn't some massive corporate competitor swooping in. It is internal misalignment.
Absolutely. The internal friction between co-founders destroys far more value than external market forces ever do.
And the book provides two really contrasting case studies that illustrate this perfectly. So let's get into those. The first one involves a company the author refers to as AXD.
Right, AXD. They were building this high-end collectible auction site. And their narrative is just a classic cautionary tale about the psychology of early founders.
So what happened with them?
Well, you have these two individuals, Allie and John. They have a compelling idea for this auction platform, but like many first-time founders, they just rely on a casual verbal agreement.
Oh no, a verbal handshake.
Yeah. The implicit understanding is a 50-50 split of the company's equity, but they avoid putting anything in writing because, psychologically, drawing up legal documents early on can feel, well, antagonistic.
It's awkward. It forces founders to confront really uncomfortable questions about commitment, roles, and, what happens if one person just wants to leave?
Exactly. So they dodge the awkward conversation. And then Allie dives in and does all the heavy lifting. I mean, she builds the platform, she secures the early partnerships, she's essentially running the entire business.
And what is John doing?
John treats the venture more like a casual hobby. But, and here's the kicker, when the company finally gains traction and they need to formalize their corporate structure to take on actual investment, John demands his full 50% ownership.
Based entirely on that initial verbal handshake from months prior.
Exactly. And that just completely paralyzes the company. They enter this protracted legal dispute. The foundational trust totally evaporates.
I can imagine.
And more importantly, from an operational standpoint, their capitalization table, commonly called a cap table, becomes a disputed mess.
And for anyone unfamiliar, a cap table is simply the master ledger that details exactly who owns what percentage of the company.
Right. And if a venture capitalist looks at a startup and sees that the cap table is tied up in litigation, or that a founder who does zero actual work somehow owns half the company, they will walk away immediately.
Yeah, no investor wants to put their capital into a structurally fractured entity.
Never. So AXD couldn't raise money, they couldn't make executive decisions, and the company eventually just collapsed.
Now compare that disaster to the second case study. This is a company called Nevitool, operating in the business-to-business logistics space.
Right.
They faced a very similar crisis, right, where one of their founders essentially became dead weight shortly after the company launched, which created a massive internal deadlock.
Yeah, almost the exact same scenario as AXD.
But their outcome was entirely different because they treated legal structure as a core component of their people strategy from day one.
Nevitool understood that relying on goodwill is just not a business strategy. So from their inception, they drafted ironclad founder agreements.
What kind of stuff was in there?
Well, these documents included clear intellectual property assignment clauses, meaning Any code or ideas generated by the founders belonged explicitly to the company, not to the individuals themselves.
That's smart.
And crucially, they utilized a vesting schedule for their equity.
Let's pause and explain the mechanics of a vesting schedule, because it is the exact tool that saved Navitul in this situation.
Okay, so a vesting schedule means that a founder does not receive all of their promised ownership on the first day.
Right.
If a founder is allocated, say, 40% of the company, that equity vests or becomes truly theirs gradually over a set period. Typically, it's a 4-year period.
And often there is a 1-year cliff, right?
Exactly. A 1-year cliff means if the founder leaves or is fired before the first year is up, they walk away with absolutely zero equity.
Wow. Furthermore, Navitul had buy-sell provisions. This is a pre-agreed legal mechanism that outlines exactly how the company can forcefully buy back a founder's shares at a predetermined valuation if that founder needs to be removed.
Right. So when this particular founder became a hindrance, it wasn't a death sentence for Navitul. They didn't have to negotiate a messy exit while emotions were running high.
He just followed the rules they already set.
Exactly. They simply executed the legal mechanisms they had built when everyone was still friends. The departing founder left with only the small fraction of equity that had already vested, and the company retained ownership of all the technology.
So clean.
But the most revealing part of the Navitul story is what happened next. Just 6 months after this massive internal shakeup, they removed a core founder, they successfully closed a $6 million Series A funding round.
And a Series A is typically a startup's first significant round of venture capital financing, right?
Yeah.
Meant to scale a product that already has some proven traction.
Right. And the VCs didn't look at the founder's departure as a red flag at all. They looked at the clean execution of those legal provisions as a massive signal of operational maturity.
Okay, I understand the utility of these documents, I really do. But I want to push back on the reality of actually implementing them.
Okay, let's hear it.
If two friends are brainstorming a project in a coffee shop, doesn't bringing in lawyers and drafting dispute resolution mechanisms instantly kill the creative momentum?
I get that, yeah.
It feels equivalent to sitting down on a first date and demanding you both sign a prenuptial agreement before you even order drinks. It just signals an immediate lack of trust.
That is the exact psychological hurdle most founders stumble over. But Park reframes this dynamic completely in the book. He explicitly argues that we need to stop viewing legal agreements as punitive or paranoid or merely a line item in overhead expenses.
So what are they?
Legal structure is leverage. Think of a trapeze artist performing in a circus.
Right.
They can execute much more daring, complex, and creative flips when they know there is a tightly woven safety net suspended below them. Clear legal agreements are that safety net.
Oh, I love that. So it's not planning for failure. It's engineering the stability required to take big risks.
Precisely. It eliminates unspoken anxieties. When everyone knows exactly how their equity vests, what their specific operational roles are, and the exact mechanism for resolving a deadlock, it frees up an immense amount of cognitive energy.
Because you aren't secretly worried about a verbal agreement being used against you later.
Right. The team can debate product features aggressively and take massive creative swings. It just heavily reduces transaction friction.
And, this logic applies far beyond tech startups. If you are, say, a freelance designer partnering with a copywriter for a major client pitch, drafting a simple operating agreement outlining who owns the client relationship and how the fee is split doesn't kill the vibe.
Not at all.
It just ensures a minor disagreement over an invoice doesn't destroy your professional relationship.
Exactly. So you have this resilient team locked in. They have the shared history, the trust, and the structural safety net. Now they have to actually build something. Which moves us to the second element of the framework. Product.
Product, yes. And Park describes the entire product phase with a phrase that I think demands a lot of humility from any creator. He calls it a journey into known unknowns.
The journey into known unknowns. It is such a vital acknowledgement that no matter how brilliant your initial concept is, the first iteration of your product is almost certainly flawed.
Yeah, and the book highlights the origins of Airbnb to illustrate this, which is wild because they did not launch as a sophisticated, trust-based global platform for real estate sharing.
No, not at all. They launched because the founders literally couldn't pay their rent. And they noticed all the hotels in San Francisco were booked for a local design conference.
So they just set up 3 air mattresses on their living room floor and offer guests homemade Pop-Tarts in the morning.
Pop-Tarts, yeah. Similarly, Netflix did not begin as a streaming behemoth producing original cinema. They started by mailing physical DVDs in red envelopes.
basically operating as a logistics and postal company to compete with Blockbuster's late fees.
Right. The ultimate vision of a product is entirely different from its starting point. Always.
And this evolutionary process relies heavily on a concept called the minimum viable product, or MVP. Park cites Eric Ries here, the pioneer of the lean startup methodology.
Yeah, Ries popularized the core mantra of product development. Get out of the building.
Which is a metaphorical directive, right?
Exactly. Inside the building, whether that is a corporate boardroom or a garage, you only possess assumptions and opinions. You have no factual data about market behavior.
The facts live entirely outside.
The facts live entirely outside the building, in the hands of the end users. And the MVP is the specific vehicle you use to cross that threshold. It is the most basic version of a product that allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the absolute least effort and capital expenditure.
And the classic example detailed in the book for this is Dropbox.
Oh, this is a great one.
Right. Today, Dropbox is just this seamless file syncing utility. But building the initial back-end architecture to automatically sync files across various operating systems with zero latency was an incredibly complex engineering challenge.
It would have required massive capital, huge server space, and months of coding to build a fully functional prototype.
Right. So if the founders had stayed inside the building and spent a year building that infrastructure, they risked launching a product that no one actually wanted to use.
But their MVP was brilliantly unconventional. They didn't build the complex backend at all.
Wait, they didn't build the software?
Nope. Instead, the founder, Drew Houston, recorded a simple 3-minute video demonstrating how the software would work once it was built.
That's genius.
Yeah. He simulated the user interface, showing a file being dragged into a folder on a desktop and instantly appearing on another device.
Smoke and mirrors, basically.
Totally. And crucially, he seeded the video with inside jokes tailored specifically to the readers of Hacker News, which is a highly influential tech aggregator site.
So he targeted the exact early adopter demographic that would appreciate the utility of the tool.
Exactly. And when he posted the video, it went totally viral within that community. The Dropbox beta waiting list exploded from like a few thousand people to over 75,000 users overnight.
Wow. So they achieved massive, undeniable market validation without writing a single line of the complex networking code.
That is true MVP execution.
Right.
You are testing the market's appetite before you build the industrial kitchen.
I love that. However, the book introduces a really significant caveat here. Validating an idea early on comes with its own set of dangers, right? Primarily what Tom Eisenman refers to as the trap of false positives.
Yes, false positives are deadly. It's a very frequent failure mode for startups.
How does it usually happen?
Well, founders launch an MVP, they show it to a small, highly vocal group of early adopters, or even worse, just their immediate friends and family, and they receive all this enthusiastic praise.
Right, because their mom thinks it's a great idea.
Exactly. So the founders mistake this localized enthusiasm for broad market demand. They scale up production, they hire a sales team, and then they realize the general public has zero interest in the product.
They have built a solution that is desperately searching for a problem.
Which is why Park integrates Clay Christensen's jobs to be done theory here. It's meant to really ground the product development process because the theory completely changes how you view consumer behavior.
I'm familiar with this. Christensen's framework argues that consumers do not simply purchase products. They hire products to perform a specific job in their lives.
Yes. And the classic illustration of this is the milkshake study.
Right. Explain the milkshake study because it's fascinating.
Okay, so when a fast food chain wants to sell more milkshakes, they usually just ask customers how to improve the product, right? Make it thicker, add more chocolate, make it cheaper.
Standard focus group stuff.
Exactly. But when researchers actually observed buying behavior in the restaurant, they noticed this massive spike in milkshake sales at 8 a.m., mostly to solo commuters.
At 8 a.m.
Yeah. And those commuters weren't buying milkshakes for dessert. They were hiring the milkshake to do a specific job, to provide a long-lasting, mess-free distraction during a really boring morning commute.
Because a bagel is too crumbly and messy for the car.
Right. And a banana is eaten too quickly. The milkshake was hired for its specific utility in that exact context.
So applying that to a startup, a founder cannot afford to fall in love with their own solution. They have to obsess over the customer's pain point.
Completely. If you are developing a new productivity app and you cannot articulate the exact urgent frustration that app resolves using the exact vocabulary of your target user, you are building blind.
And when you were actively testing these assumptions, you have to be hypervigilant for what the book calls pivot signals, right?
Yes, pivot signals are crucial. These are the harsh data points that indicate your current product iteration is failing the jobs to be done test.
Like what? Give me an example of a pivot signal.
Well, a primary one is high interest combined with low conversion. This happens when users visit your website, they read your marketing copy, maybe they even download a free trial, but then they completely abandon the product when asked to actually pay.
Ah, so they like the idea, but not enough to open their wallets.
Exactly. It signals that your marketing is identifying a real problem, but your product is not providing a compelling enough solution to justify the cost.
Another critical pivot signal is high customer churn. Like, if customers buy the product but cancel their subscriptions after the first month, it doesn't matter how many new features you add.
Or how much you tweak the user interface.
Right. The core product is fundamentally failing to do the job it was hired for, and a resilient team will accept that data and pivot.
While a dysfunctional team will just blame the customer and double down on a failing strategy.
Exactly. But let's assume the team navigates all of this perfectly. They identify a real pain point, build a validated MVP, and customers are consistently paying and staying.
The dream scenario.
The dream. Even then, having a great product isn't enough to survive if there are 10 other companies selling the exact same solution. And this introduces the third core element of the framework: position.
Position is where things get really intense. It's the crucible where your theoretical strategy actually collides with revenue generation.
And Park defines position as the tightly integrated combination of your strategy and your business model.
Right. Yes, strategy dictates exactly how you are different from the competition, and the business model dictates exactly how you capture value or make money from that difference.
On the strategy side, the book relies heavily on Michael Porter's foundational frameworks, specifically his generic strategies.
Porter is essential reading here. He argues that there are really only 3 viable strategic paths for a business to achieve a competitive advantage.
Okay, let's walk through them. First is cost leadership.
Right. Cost leadership is basically the Walmart model. You are ruthlessly optimizing your supply chain and operations so you can consistently offer the absolute lowest price in the market.
Then you have differentiation,
which is the Apple model. You offer a premium, highly distinct product that commands a massive price markup because consumers perceive it as uniquely valuable.
And finally, you have the focus strategy.
Yeah, the focus strategy involves abandoning the broader market entirely to serve a highly specific, narrow niche.
But the fatal error for early-stage companies is falling into what Porter calls the stuck-in-the-middle trap.
Oh, this is such a common psychological pitfall for founders who are just desperate for revenue. They try to be everything to everyone.
They attempt to offer a product that is slightly cheaper than the premium options, but with slightly better features than the budget options, and they market it to every conceivable demographic.
And the result is just complete market apathy. When you try to appeal to everyone, your brand identity becomes so diluted that you mean absolutely nothing to anyone.
The book provides an excellent case study of a startup that avoided this trap by executing an absolute masterclass in the focus strategy. It involves a company entering the cold brew coffee market.
Oh, I love this example because the ready-to-drink coffee sector is a notoriously brutal, saturated market. I mean, it's dominated by massive global conglomerates with endless distribution budgets.
Yeah, if this startup had simply bottled their cold brew and tried to fight for shelf space in local supermarkets, they would have been totally annihilated.
They would have been completely stuck in the middle. They lacked the scale for cost leadership, and they lacked the marketing budget for broad differentiation.
So what did they do instead?
Instead, they analyzed their product's specific utility. They had actually developed a brewing process that yielded a very smooth taste and, crucially, a remarkably long shelf life without requiring refrigeration until it was opened.
That's a huge logistical advantage.
Huge. So they realized their highest value wasn't in fighting for the everyday consumer in a grocery aisle. They deployed a hyper-targeted focus strategy. They positioned their product specifically as a barista-quality solution for places without baristas.
Wow. Just that one phrase changes everything.
It completely altered their trajectory. They stopped calling supermarkets, they started targeting boutique hotels, high-end corporate offices, and independent cafes that wanted to offer premium coffee but refused to invest in expensive espresso machines or trained staff.
By focusing exclusively on that niche, they solved a massive operational headache for those specific businesses.
Exactly. which allowed them to secure reliable, recurring bulk orders. It generated the steady cash flow required to build a premium brand identity away from all the noise of the supermarket.
And eventually, having established a powerful reputation in that hospitality niche, they were able to expand into national high-end retailers on their own terms, culminating in a highly lucrative strategic acquisition.
Their position was their absolute shield. But the book also introduces a concept from organizational ecology that suggests total isolation from competition isn't actually the goal either.
Right, it's called Red Queen dynamics, which sounds like a concept from evolutionary biology, not corporate strategy. How does that apply to startups?
Well, it originates directly from evolutionary biology. It takes its name from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, where the Red Queen tells Alice, "Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place." In biology, it describes an evolutionary arms race. Competing species must constantly adapt just to survive each other. The fox gets slightly faster, so only the fastest rabbits survive, which means the next generation of foxes must evolve to be even faster.
So applied to the business ecosystem, startups exist in this landscape of constant competitive adaptation.
Exactly. Now, if a startup successfully invents a completely novel product and discovers a blue ocean, a market space with zero competitors, it feels like a massive victory.
And it is a victory, right? But a dangerous one.
Very dangerous. Because without the friction of direct competition, a startup can easily grow complacent. The evolutionary pressure is completely removed.
They stop obsessively iterating on their product.
Right. They allow their customer service to slip, and their internal operations just become bloated. Inevitably, the high profit margins of that blue ocean will attract competitors.
And when a hungry, agile competitor finally enters that space, the original startup is often too sluggish to defend its territory.
Exactly. So you need a distinct position to avoid being crushed in a saturated market. But you also need enough competitive friction to prevent your organization from getting soft.
That makes total sense. But I want to scrutinize the mechanics of the focus strategy for a moment.
Sure.
If a startup commits fully to a hyper-niche market, like the cold brew company, limiting themselves to boutique hotels without baristas, aren't they fundamentally capping their own growth?
I see where you're going.
I mean, the entire ethos of venture capital in Silicon Valley is the pursuit of the unicorn, right? A company valued at over $1 billion. You do not reach $1 billion valuation by exclusively selling coffee to 50 boutique hotels. Doesn't playing it safe in a niche contradict the ambition required to build a massive enterprise?
It is a totally logical concern, but it misinterprets the strategic function of a niche. A niche is not a permanent cage. It is a beachhead.
A beachhead.
Yes. Think about military strategy. An invading force doesn't try to conquer an entire continent on the first day. That spreads their resources way too thin, ensuring defeat.
Right. Instead, they concentrate all of their overwhelming force on securing one small defensible strip of land, the beachhead.
Exactly. And once that territory is secure, they use it as a fortified base to supply the broader invasion. Startups operate with severely limited resources, capital, personnel, and time.
So if a startup attempts a broad market launch on day one, they're basically trying to conquer the continent.
And they will run out of money trying to market to everyone simultaneously. However, if they focus all their limited resources on dominating one highly specific, deeply engaged niche, they win. They achieve a monopoly in a micro market.
And that beachhead provides them with reliable cash flow, profound brand loyalty, and a defensive moat against larger competitors who aren't paying attention to that small sector.
Exactly. And the ultimate example of this is Amazon.
Oh, of course.
Jeff Bezos did not launch Amazon as the everything store. He launched it as an online bookstore. Books were the perfect niche beachhead. They are easy to ship, they don't spoil, and there is a massive catalog of items that physical stores couldn't possibly stock.
So by dominating the niche of online book sales, Amazon built the logistical infrastructure, the customer trust, and the capital reserves necessary to eventually expand.
Yep. They expanded into electronics, clothing, cloud computing, and groceries. The niche funds the empire.
The niche funds the empire. I love that. And that brings us to the ultimate synthesis of Park's framework. When a startup has secured that beachhead, and they have constructed a cohesive narrative that proves they have resilient people, a rigorously validated product, and a sharp defensible position, they are finally prepared to scale.
Which introduces Section 5 of the book, The Interconnected Ecosystem in Fundraising.
Fundraising. This process is like the ultimate stress test for the 3Ps framework. A recurring mistake founders make is walking into a venture capital pitch, believing the product is the sole star of the show.
Oh, they do all the time.
They spend the entire meeting demonstrating a slick prototype and showing aggressive revenue projections, assuming that a great idea is enough to secure millions of dollars.
But as we established earlier with the Strebuleyev and Dang data, top-tier VCs are evaluating something much deeper. They know the prototype will inevitably change.
So what are they analyzing?
They're analyzing the startup's capacity for integrated execution. They want to observe a robust, adaptable team, the people running rapid, data-informed iterations, the product, within a highly focused, viable market strategy, the position.
Right. So if a startup has brilliant engineers but zero understanding of their target demographics' pain points, they might secure a polite meeting, but they will rarely secure the funding.
Exactly. And Park highlights a maxim that acts as a profound warning for founders here. Funding amplifies fundamentals. It cannot fix a broken 3Ps framework.
That is so important. There is this dangerous misconception that injecting venture capital into a struggling company will just magically solve its operational issues.
Right. If your co-founders despise each other, or if your product costs more to manufacture than the market is willing to pay, dropping $10 million into the company doesn't fix those problems.
It simply scales the dysfunction. You just burn through the cash faster, and your eventual failure becomes much more public and spectacular.
Capital is rocket fuel. If the structural integrity of the rocket is compromised, the fuel simply ensures the explosion is massive.
Wow.
And this underscores Park's central thesis. The 3Ps are not isolated variables. They form a tightly integrated ecosystem. You cannot alter one element without forcing a recalibration of the other two.
And the book explores this integration through what it calls a systems-level crisis response.
Yes. This response mechanism is the defining characteristic of a master founder, because every single startup will encounter a severe crisis. A major feature launch will fail, a key competitor will emerge, or a marketing campaign will fall flat.
And when chaos strikes, an amateur founder immediately narrows their field of vision to the localized failure, right?
Exactly. If a new software feature isn't being used, they will assume it is purely a product problem. They will obsessively rewrite the code, redesign the user interface, and tweak the button colors. They treat the symptom in complete isolation.
But the master founder zooms out and examines the entire machine. They recognize that a failure in the product is often a symptom of a misalignment elsewhere in the 3Ps.
Right, they ask systemic questions. Okay, the launch failed, but why? Did we actually possess the right engineering talent to build this seamlessly, or were we lacking in our hiring? That evaluates the people element.
Or they ask, did we launch this feature to the right segment of our user base, or did we dilute our focus? That evaluates the position element.
And did we actually validate that our users wanted this feature, or did we build it based on an internal assumption? That evaluates the underlying product methodology.
So they solve the crisis by realigning the entire system. Think of the 3Ps framework as 3 interconnected gears in a really complex watch.
Let's play out that gear analogy, actually. Imagine a startup decides to completely upgrade their people gear.
Okay.
They raise some capital and hire a highly renowned, incredibly expensive chief technology officer away from a massive tech conglomerate. That is a massive swap of a component.
Right. You cannot simply drop that new heavy gear into the watch and expect it to tick normally.
Exactly. That new CTO is going to look at the existing code base and demand a more robust, scalable architecture. Rebuilding the architecture fundamentally alters your product roadmap. Now you have a highly sophisticated, enterprise-grade product.
But wait, your original position was selling cheap software to small, local businesses.
Right. And small businesses don't need, and they definitely won't pay for, enterprise-grade architecture.
Right.
So you must completely overhaul your marketing and target Fortune 500 companies instead. You radically change your position.
So if you upgrade the CTO but fail to adjust the product and position gears to accommodate them, the entire mechanism just jams up and the company stalls.
It is a constant, dynamic process of equilibrium. Building an organization that endures beyond the initial excitement of its launch requires this holistic, integrated view.
Because execution is not a singular event.
No, it is the relentless discipline of keeping the people, product, and position aligned as the company scales and the market evolves.
It is a massive intellectual undertaking, but viewing it through Park's framework really transforms the chaos of building a business into a navigable system. So let's synthesize this whole journey. What starting startups proves definitively is that the mythology of the lone genius in a garage is a dangerous distraction.
Ideas are merely the starting line. True, durable success is forged through relentless execution.
It requires the emotional intelligence and legal foresight to bind the right people together. It requires the humility to get out of the building and build a rigorously validated product that solves a real pain point.
And it requires the strategic discipline to find a focused, defensible position in a hostile market.
Above all, it demonstrates that a team's capacity to adapt to new, harsh evidence will always outperform raw, stubborn brilliance.
It is a philosophy grounded entirely in reality. It asks founders to embrace the unglamorous work drafting operating agreements, confronting uncomfortable data, and saying no to lucrative distractions, because that foundational discipline is what actually creates leverage and longevity.
And as we wrap up, we always want to leave you with a concept that extends beyond the immediate mechanics of the book, something for you to examine in your own life. Toward the conclusion of Park's research, he observes a fascinating phenomenon. Startups that manage to survive the gauntlet of the 3 Ps eventually mature into permanent institutions.
Right. As they scale, their culture evolves from the founder's initial gut-level instincts into deeply embedded corporate rituals, hiring algorithms, and operational norms.
So, consider this provocative thought. If a massive global corporation's ultimate operational success and its structural flaws are simply scaled-up reflections of its foundational team dynamics, how does the very first casual conversation between 2 potential collaborators in a coffee shop silently write the source code of a corporate culture years before a single product is ever launched? Think about the mechanics of your own life. Think about how the boundaries you set, the difficult conversations you choose not to avoid, and the trust you actively build in your daily interactions right now are quietly laying the institutional foundation for your entire career trajectory. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.